said, it is, you know, a nightmare.
Oh, part of
Yeah, because those are common elements, so.
so
We're not supposed to do this.
Yeah, no.
Good, yeah.
But,
And
I
so
mean,
that's why.
realistically, I mean, we're not gonna care about interior gates, so.
absolutely.
And I guess the big question was, is the, like, from a higher perspective,
Yeah.
is it necessary? Because it's a 199 unit district.
Yeah.
57.
This Planning Commission meeting is called to order. This meeting has been properly noticed and posted in compliance with the open meeting law. These proceedings are being video recorded and can be viewed live on City of Las Vegas TV on Cox Cable Channel 2. You can also watch the meeting live online and access other city content by visiting lasvegasnevada.gov/connect. The proceedings will be rebroadcast on City of Las Vegas TV the Saturday after the meeting at 10 a.m., Monday at midnight, and the following Tuesday at 6 p.m. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. City Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Chair Kasama,
Present.
Vice Chair Slotman,
Present.
Commissioner Rogan,
Present.
Commissioner Taylor,
Present.
Commissioner DeSalvio,
Present.
Commissioner LeBeau.
Present.
Thank you, Chair. You have a quorum.
Thank you. I call your attention to the information printed in your agenda concerning our actions and the appeal and review process, if appropriate. Please read this carefully, and if you have any questions, staff is available. Also, the second page of the agenda contains our rules of conduct. We appreciate your adhering to these rules so we can have a smooth meeting. Thank you. Public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters on the agenda for action. If you wish to be heard, come to the podium and give your name for the record. The amount of discussion, as well as the amount of time any single speaker is allowed, may be limited. All comments made under this item for specific action items will be cross-referenced to those items. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak under this portion of the agenda? Seeing none, I will move on to public hearing item 5, presentation and discussion regarding implementation of the City of Las Vegas 2050 Master Plan, special area plans, and associated amendments to Title 19 of the Las Vegas Municipal Code, including creation of a Transit-Oriented Development Overlay District, TODO, parking standards, attainable housing incentives, and infill and redevelopment efforts for all wards.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Seth Floyd for the record. And Madam Chair, we always like to start everyone's tenure as chair off with a bang. Chair Taylor had a fairly controversial project right at the beginning, and you get to start with something we haven't done in my entire time here, which is a workshop. But there are some things that come up in front of you from time to time that are so important and deserve a little extra attention because they are central to our master plan and the future of Las Vegas. And so tonight we're going to talk through, and Marco is going to go through, and then we'll have a conversation about our TOD overlay district. And the reason why this is so important and why I think it deserves this extra attention is because this is central to our 2050 master plan. We are poised to grow up instead of out. We're running out of land to grow out, and we're going to be growing up, and a key component of that is going to be having transit and the development to support that transit. So with that, I will turn it over to Marco, and then we have, as you can see, we have quite a bit of our staff here who's available to answer questions and engage in discussion after Marco gets through. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission, Marco Vallada, City of Las Vegas, Department of Community Development for the record. As Seth mentioned, we're here primarily to talk about the TOD overlay, what it is, why we are doing it, and how it works, as well as some other complementary amendments that you will be seeing over the next couple of commission meetings, and you might be hearing a little bit about. One being parking standards, which is kind of fundamental and central to how we do planning items throughout the year. Attainable housing and associated infill and redevelopment efforts that were born out of some bills from the last legislative session. So TOD really is the basis for the 2050 Master Plan's land use strategy, and as Seth mentioned, we're at our limits. We need to be thinking in the future, how do we grow up, because we really cannot grow out, and infill and redevelopment is key. So how do we marry housing and transportation together, and how can we incentivize it in such a way that we get good quality design, good quality affordable housing? But perhaps maybe the more fundamental question is, what is TOD? For those of you who know, I'm going to run through this at a very high level, but in a nutshell, you have to have the transit, something that we don't have a rail-based system just yet, but that's something we're looking at regionally with our partners at the Regional Transportation Commission. It's been something that's been talked about for many years now. We are in the middle of an alternatives analysis for Charleston Boulevard, and there are some high-capacity transit projects that are under construction now. But the development side of it, the oriented development part of TOD, is that it's proximate to the locations itself where transit is served. It's typically compact, medium, and high-density development that is at a human scale, that is walkable and bikeable. It has a good pedestrian-friendly design. It connects to neighborhoods that are adjacent, and it has a complementary mix of land uses, typically vertically, but also in some cases horizontally. And it often includes an affordable housing component to it as well. In many places where TOD has been implemented, that is central to its overall design. And design really is a focus of TOD, is how do you get more people moving through a city in a way that contemplates multiple modes. How do you do so in a way that makes it friendly for all users of the streets, and how do you connect other places all together seamlessly? And really, the 2050 master plan, when we were doing the development of the plan itself, we made this kind of central to it for a number of different reasons. I mean, a lot of our peer cities like Salt Lake City, Phoenix, Denver, California cities, Sacramento, where they've done a lot of big transit investment, they've seen what TOD can do. Here in Salt Lake City, as an example, this was just a vacant parcel near downtown Salt Lake. And this is really seen as an economic development tool. You can see a transformation in terms of land value and quality development that comes as a result of a transportation investment. And cities, our peer cities, have witnessed this and experienced this, which is why we, again, because of that land use limitation that we have with the city itself, we decided to employ this strategy. It goes hand in hand with RTC's onboard future mobility plan. We link downtown Las Vegas with other parts of the valley, with Henderson, with Nellis Air Force Base, with the airport, with the Strip, Summerlin, Centennial Hills. This future mobility plan is actually underway as we speak. There are different corridors that are under construction. Right out here on Bonneville Avenue, you can see evidence of that. The Maryland Parkway line is the first line of the onboard plan that is under construction. And you can see, we have an example of transit-oriented development right at First in Bonneville. You have what will be the central hub for the entire system right at our doorstep at Civic Plaza. We'll have a restaurant as well as the office space that is immediately above this BRT station right down the street from us here at City Hall. Henderson, same thing is happening. Center running BRT is under construction along Boulder Highway, and that will eventually connect to the Strip and to downtown Las Vegas through that line. So where we get into how do we regulate the land use, we have a text amendment in front of you for the Planning Commission later tonight for your consideration that's in two parts. One is a general plan amendment that will amend the 2050 plan itself that is specific to the overlay, which is the text amendment portion. This amendment to the general plan is more or less lining up the zoning districts in which we could use these compatible zoning, the overlay itself, for the land uses that we have already designated 3,000 parcels as part of the adoption of the 2050 master plan. So for residential, the R3, R4, and RTH zones. For commercial, C1, C2, and O, and civic would all be where this TOD overlay would apply. I'm stuck here. Okay, hopefully we can continue on here with this. So the TOD standards themselves will, as part of the text amendment, some of the benefits here is that we would use the base zoning code standards to apply for all districts as well as parking and signage, but the overlay provides some modifications to those base districts. Some of the reasons we do that is that it presents fewer restrictions. It's more flexible. We looked at a number of different ways of how we could potentially implement this, and the overlay was the easiest way. We also looked at some of the uses. We wanted to restrict some of the uses that we have now that are allowable under the commercial or the residential zoning standards, so they're not in conflict with the transit, pedestrian, and bicycle emphasis. So audio-oriented uses are the ones that we try to tamp down on a little bit. In terms of the zoning standards, again, this is a modification of what we have for that's existing right now. So for Residential and commercial, to get that human scale, we're capping the building heights at the levels that you see indicated here. For R3 and R4, 5 to 7 stories. For C1, C2, 5 to 7 stories at those heights that you see indicated. We have existing overlays such as the CD overlay or other overlays that, like the airport overlay, that might come into conflict. Those would obviously still be in place. In terms of minimum lot sizes, we don't have any minimums. We have no maximums on terms of lot coverage, with the exception for C1 and O. That we try to, again, maximize the amount of buildable space that a development can go on. We're trying to have buildings come up to the property line. So in terms of setbacks, we're moving the buildings up closer to the street to make them more accessible to the users that are on the street. And as far as the setbacks go, we're again trying to maximize and optimize the amount of usable space within the properties themselves. In terms of building frontages, again, we're trying to have more of that street face up along the street that is accessible to the pedestrians. So we're again trying to have those buildings up against the street so that so pedestrians can enter the buildings and get into the residential or commercial or retail areas easier from the transit stops. As far as residential adjacency, we'll come back to this in just a couple minutes, but this is something that could be waived with the Planning Commission granting final approval. But the important thing here is that as far as residential adjacency goes, we recognize that this is something that occurs throughout the city. We might have to take a look at it from a more global perspective. And if there was some adjustments that we need to make with respect to adjacency for existing neighborhoods, if there are those concerns, we'll take a look at that, not only for the transit-oriented development overlay piece of it, but for other parts of the city as well, in which the overlay does not apply. We do have a couple other provisions here, including the provision for a mandatory neighborhood meeting if necessary. Additional setbacks might be required if there's utility conflicts. And then we do emphasize there are some design principles that we want to have in place, such as courtyards and plazas, making sure that that's explicit, especially right up at the front of the development itself, and waivers that might come into play with respect to the height limitations, depending on the types of development that we get in. So, in a nutshell, that is the overarching design principles. There are other provisions in here that you'll see within the amendment itself. We get into things like buildings, facade, perimeter landscaping, again, trying to make these high quality developments. Making sure that we have a mix of uses, complementary mixed uses, residential with commercial, commercial with retail. Those are all things that work well together. We do not want to have uses that are in conflict, so a lot of those have been taken out of play, so that we don't have things that are just not working well together. We do employ a maximum parking standard in this case, again, because the idea is we're trying to encourage transit use and make high-quality pedestrian and bikeable locations. And then employing a bike parking standard that will also come into effect for other parts of the parking code, which we'll talk about next. So what does something like this look like? We took these standards that you have in front of you, and we modeled it out just to give you an idea as to how this would look. This is just kind of an example using those standards. We're trying to make these walkable. We're trying to make them human scaled, and as you can see, you have this street frontage that really is conducive to that pedestrian space. You have residential that's on top of a potential commercial area, and then parking that is set back behind the building itself. And again, just to give an idea of the flavor of what type of development we're looking at. I mean, we modeled this off of other developments, other TOD that has been employed in other ordinances nationwide. You can see that in California. This is an example in Duarte. and 9 Mile Station in Aurora, Colorado. Again, these are developments that have been built within the last couple of years. Right behind me in both of these cases are light rail stations, but you can also see that in bus rapid transit cases as well. This is something that we've started to see in Ogden, Utah, and in Sparks, Nevada. Right behind me here is Centennial Plaza, which is the transit hub in Sparks that is anchored by Victorian Square. So there is no rezoning that's associated with this tonight. This is part of the strategy. What we're talking about is just the ordinance itself. When a significant project like Charleston or Maryland Parkway or Boulder Highway is built, that might be the time when it is appropriate to have a rezoning request taken in. Or we could maybe look at an entire corridor as a whole and say this is an opportunity here for a rezoning to place the overlay because it makes sense. We might have other instances where there is an applicant request. That might be appropriate as well. When we have Maryland Parkway completed up to this point, we haven't decided to roll that out in terms of a rezoning, but that could be something that it might make sense. If you have a project that is really appropriate from a transit-oriented standpoint, an applicant may very well fit into that box of being able to make a request for a rezoning. So that is the transit-oriented development overlay. I'm going to shift gears a little bit to one of the other projects that I mentioned earlier, the parking standards. We conducted a study over a good part of the past year. I have Ian Reinex and some of the other long-range and case planners that helped us out at part of this, that took a look at parking best practices and some of the key takeaways of parking with respect to Title 19. Over the last 5 years, we had about 112 parking variances in some way, shape, or form. About 95% of those were approved over the staff recommendations. So again, parking is one of those things that, we have outdated standards, and we've known this for many years now. The practices and the changes that have happened in terms of providing parking for, the day after Thanksgiving or the day before Christmas are long over. And with respect to infill and redevelopment and encouraging more compact design, there are better utilization of land that can be done for a lot of our parking lots and parking areas. There is an opportunity for increased economic potential for better site utilization. And again, it helps improve safety, it helps improve the streetscape, and it helps with TOD, and it reduces the urban heat island effect if we can use parking sites a lot better. So we took a look at some parking studies. We have had one or two in Southern Nevada that were applicable. We took a good look at, including Clark County, as well as some of the literature nationwide, and developed a methodology that followed the local engineering standards and some of the best practices to come up with a special report. And this is something that you don't have in front of you now, but we will make available here as we get to the next meeting. But again, in consideration of some of the trends that have happened over the last couple of years in terms of the retail landscape, we've started to see more smaller format stores. Trader Joe's, Aldi. A lot of retail has right-sized itself in terms of the changing economic conditions, thus meaning that there's a smaller demand on parking itself. There's been a shift towards local fulfillment centers. You see that with Target, with Walmart, with other locations where you can just go to a big box retail, and instead of parking, you pick up your goods. We've seen e-commerce also change the landscape. Brick and mortar retail has really dramatically changed since Amazon and other e-retailers have rolled out some of their products. I mean, it's really doesn't create that much demand for parking. And then as we saw with COVID, the demands for parking at commercial locations have really shrunk as well. If you throw autonomous vehicles into the mix, what does that do in terms of parking? So our standards are really, which were built in the 1950s and 1960s, just don't make as much sense anymore when you throw some of these trends in. So you might have an area like a regional shopping center or power centers that just, you know, they just are seas of parking and seas of asphalt. Could those locations be better utilized? And when we took a look at shopping centers in particular, you know, I mean, as you would expect, I mean, they're mostly empty for most of the time. And you have those exception days during the holidays, of course, but more often than not, you will find a sea of parking that is just not being used. We took a look at a number of sites within the city itself in terms of what Title 19 required. You know, this is Best in the West Shopping Center. We had 1,700 parking spaces that were required to be installed. The peak holiday occupancy at the most was 1,000, but really off-holiday occupancy was less than 1,000. You look at Town Center, this one is out by 215 in Durango. There are a number of parking expansions for this office tower, but the vacancy rate in that is 50% at best. I mean, in terms of what Title 19 is required to provide, I mean, it is just way overparked. And we can see that in other cases too that planning looked at, shopping and office and medical. I mean, they all kind of tell the same story. In terms of the actual parking that's required, the actual that is provided by the developer itself, and the number of parked cars that are observed there, in many of those cases, they're way overparked. So all the more need to right-size those parking standards themselves. So in terms of the recommendations of that parking study, we have looked from top to bottom at all of the uses and the parking requirements. There are some of the exceptions, as mentioned, with the transit-oriented development overlay and form-based code, which is specific to downtown, that we're setting aside. But for the rest of Title 19, if you look at industrial parking recommendations, you can cut a lot of those uses clearly in half in terms of their parking rates. Medical and office parking, again, these are all draft, but in nearly all those cases, looking at significant cuts in what is actually required. We might have some instances like with retail where it might not make sense to make a significant change, but looking at what those parking rates are and applying some of the math behind it, I mean, we really don't, you know, we really kind of scratch the surface of what is actually going on out there. Ultimately, we're trying to get those parking reductions to, again, achieve some of those goals that were mentioned earlier. Residential is a little bit different. We have a little bit of a larger list here that we took a look at for some of our other residential uses, but some of those don't really need to change, especially with multifamily. In fact, there are plenty of arguments there to actually keep what we have in place or make some slight modifications with respect to how many spaces are required for some of those uses. And again, parking, you know, overall, I mean, it's not often understood, and there's a great author, I'm sure maybe some of you might have heard of him, Donald Shoup. He passed away a couple of years ago. He's a professor at UCLA. A lot of what he had advocated for in terms of the high cost of free parking, we're trying to implement in this. I mean, there are a lot of costs that are direct with providing parking in the surface case or in the structured case, but there's also the indirect and often hidden costs of parking that you know, that are just not well seen, not well understood. And by implementing some of these recommendations, ultimately we want to get a better quality built environment. For those uses out there where we have, where it might not make sense to have a direct parking standard itself, establishing a range of allowable parking might be appropriate, and having performance standards in place for excess parking might be appropriate too, depending on what those cases are, maybe in mixed uses or something to that effect. Last two things that I'll touch on are related to TOD. In the last legislative session, we had Assembly Bill 540 passed, which is the governor's housing bill. That we have as an incentive package for affordable or attainable housing as it is now known. Title 1917 we utilize for density bonuses, expedited or prioritized reviews for plan checks and things to that effect, height bonuses, and fee reductions. These are things that we have done for the last couple of years, and we've had some pretty good success, but Assembly Bill 540 now opens the door a little bit wider to make attainable housing available in terms of an incentive for building permit fees, sewer fees, other fee components, as well as different tax components. For the way that we do it now is up to 60% of area median income. Assembly Bill 540 now changes that to all the way up to 150% of area median income, depending on which tier you're looking at. So tier 5, for example, includes housing that would be 120 to 150% of area median income. So the fee reductions that we're proposing as part of an attainable housing text amendment that's in conformance with Assembly Bill 540 would dovetail with the transit-oriented development overlay, but it would also be applicable to the form-based code as well as to our other general plan categories throughout the city. We could potentially see fee reimbursements for building permit fees and other fee components up to 100% of the entire building permit fee, using funds that were made available through Assembly Bill 540, as well as some that we have previously been allocated through City Council. So that is another text amendment that kind of dovetails. The other one is Assembly Bill 241. The first step to implementing this is a text amendment that is essentially geared towards allowing residential uses to exist in commercial zoning districts. And as you can see, we already have a lot of that in place, but we're adding a couple other conditional uses in some zoning districts where we don't have that just yet, making those conditional in O district, in the O zoning district, in the CPB zoning district. This brings us into compliance with this by right residential and commercial zoning that goes towards our infill and redevelopment efforts. Is really to get more housing built in locations where it makes the most sense to do that. So again, I'll turn this over to you now to ask questions, and again, if there's other things that we need to explain and we want to talk about some more, we can do that at this time. Overall, though, this is implementing the 2050 master plan. This helps us get to higher quality development. It gets us added density. It helps us with a lot of other metrics that we've talked about over the last couple of years in terms of achieving those longer term outcomes. And on the land use side, as the transportation system builds itself out and it evolves, we have the ability to really, I think, get that development that the 2050 plan really intended. And with that, I will turn things over to you.
Thank you so much for the presentation. You did an amazing job. And so this item has been noticed as a public hearing item. So if there's anyone from the public who would like to comment, which I don't see anybody, then I will close that. And I'll go to the rest of the commission if there are any comments or suggestions. Commissioner Taylor?
Thank you, Chair Kasama. Mr. Vallata, thank you as always for a fantastic presentation. I do have a couple of questions. So my question centers around what I see potentially as a conflict between the way that you have proposed building setbacks and building lot sizes in Table 1 with the goal in 2050 of having, the specific goals around urban forestry, shade cover, reduction of urban heat island impacts. And so when I see that perimeter landscaping when I see there's the potential for for a 0-foot setback on the front, which is, again, where you're going to have folks walking. I recognize that you said you want the buildings placed as close to the front lot line as possible for easy access from transit, but then how does that not conflict with the concept of walkability? And if you're having 0 lot lines and then perimeter landscaping completely waivable with the approval of an exception, how are those two things not completely in conflict? Like, to me, if you're gonna do transit-oriented development, then it needs to be like, full stop, we're not ever giving you a landscaping waiver, variance, exception. You will shade these sidewalks so that people can walk and so we can have mitigation of urban heat island impact. Because otherwise, what's the point? So that's my first question. If
Okay.
you could address that, that'd be awesome.
Sure. And I've invited our planning manager, Fred Solis, up here as well. So Commissioner Taylor, again, some of this is answered with respect to standard number 5. If you look in page 4 on the proposed amendments, perimeter landscaping are still going to be required for residential and commercial developments. In these cases, like, let's say Charleston Boulevard or Maryland Parkway, where we have a major capital project like the projects that are underway right now, street trees are still going to be added, much like you see on the screen here in this image that's depicted. There's still going to be that amenity zone pursuant to 1904. So we're still going to have that perimeter landscaping on the street side, as well as the landscaping on the other setbacks on the rear and on the side. And we've allowed for those spaces to appear there in Table 1.
So what would you then, and I mean, like, what would be envisioned for the language that says with the approval of an exception? Because as I'm reading that, that's saying, yes, absolutely, you have to provide this unless front yard setback or minimum building facade frontage prevents the installation with an exception. And so are we going to see developers come in and say, oh, sorry, our front elevations don't allow perimeter landscaping, front perimeter landscaping, we're asking for an exception. And so then we're gonna have the same situation that we have now, where we have, not infrequent requests for perimeter landscape waivers, not meeting the requirements for tree installation and parking or along the front. And so that's my concern.
So Fred Solis for the record. So in these instances that we are planning to implement the TOD overlay, I'm not going to call them special areas, but like these are transit ready that we're looking for. These are it's ready to have these standards implemented. So in conjunction with our 1904, which is our streetscape standards, that would be a justification for the exception, but only if those standards were also in place, right? So we add the streets, trees. If they were there, we could contemplate an exception, but it would be one of those instances where we have to take a look at it case by case. But again, the intent is for these to be TOD ready. This just isn't the entire city. It's just these specific locations where transit is going to exist or does exist, and we're going to be looking for that walkability, multimodal development.
But you'd agree with me, sorry if you can indulge me, but you'd agree with me that a lot of those transit-ready areas are the ones that are already on the higher index for heat mapping,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
So, again, for me, I have a really significant concern that this is going to have exceptions in it for making sure that they are walkable and that there are trees with the way this is set up. So that's I understand what you're saying. So what you're saying is, like, there's an existing development essentially, and they want to have some type. They want to be part of the TOD, and that's where you're looking for the exceptions. But I'm still leery of having any language that sort of sets a blanket kind of way to get around having that streetscape, especially given the fact that the TOD areas are already the ones that already have higher heat indexes. So I don't know if there can be a better description of what the exception would be, you know, like a better way to define exceptions so that it is very narrowly focused and very narrowly tailored. So that it's not just everybody's walking in here saying, oh, aha, we have this elevation, we must push right out to the absolute edge of the lot line because then we can get 5 more units in, which is important, I understand. But you've got these competing interests that you have set are priorities, and I just am concerned about the conflicts between those priorities.
Yeah, Commissioner Taylor, I totally understand. I mean, I think what we're wanting to see here ultimately is the picture on the screen, the renderings. That's what we're wanting. The exceptions might come into place where you have something like a utility or something like that makes
Right.
it, you know, difficult, something that we have to work around. In the case of Duarte, I mean, you can't see it here, but further down this street, there are utilities that are in this setback area that is really narrow, and you have landscaping that is surrounding it. I mean, that might be one of those cases where you have something like that. But ultimately, were the trees and landscaping provided? Absolutely they were. It's for the case where we don't see. But we are, I think the intent with standard number 5 in particular is with the spirit of what we have in place today, is to plant the trees and plant the perimeter landscaping, and the capital improvement project itself that modifies a streetscape, you have that tree-covered space.
Okay, thank you. All right, so, got it. Just want to make sure that concern is very strongly noted. I have another question for you because the parking study that you talked about was really fascinating. And we get, again, parking waivers all the time that come in here and, you know, where we are asking for 20 where 30 are required. So I guess is that something you guys are looking at a larger scale to see if there needs to be broader amendments to the parking requirements more, you know, citywide outside of the TOD? Because, you know, I agree with you, Marco, like Best of the West or even up at Centennial Center by that Trader Joe's, like there's just vast open parking with, by the way, no trees in the parking diamonds, because that's what was approved as a waiver back then. So pre-me and my tree thing. So anyway, I just wanted to see if that's something you guys are considering more broadly across the city in terms of looking at what's really required for parking.
Yeah, Commissioner Taylor, this would apply, the parking standards that we discussed here, this would apply to the entire city.
Okay, that's great, because I think it needs, to your point, updates. And then finally, I just didn't understand in here, on page 8, you've got uses, and so the idea again is it's transit oriented, so you're hoping that folks aren't necessarily going to be car dependent. But then you have uses in here that I would think would be things that if I lived in an area that was transit dependent, that are still services that I would want. So I'm just wondering if you can kind of explain the way the commercial spaces would look. And I guess the thing that just really caught my eye was prohibited uses, animal hospital, clinic, or shelter, and post office. Because I just maybe didn't read it close enough to understand where that was being prohibited. And if you can kind of talk about the vision for commercial accessibility, and let me know if I'm correct that the idea is everything's sort of there available so you don't have to be car dependent in these TOD areas.
Sure. So Commissioner Taylor, to answer some of your questions, so these are prohibited uses. There's an entire table in 1912 that has all the uses that you can do in C1, C2, R3, R4, and O, and RTH. some of these are very specific in terms of these are just not appropriate. Like post office, there's actually another use for post office that is low. This post office regional, that's like a regional mail processing facility. So it is a much larger than the other use, which is post office, that is more like your traditional post office that you would go to. So that's kind of the difference there. And a lot of these, they're really kind of based on what we have defined in Title 19 right now. And, we went through every single one of them. There's going to be an explanation as to, yeah, this is really driving something that is really car dependent, or the size or the scale just isn't appropriate for a corridor like this, or we just don't have anything like this in one of these overlays as it is right now.
But, and again, I guess and I see that most of these are like large uses, and I think the one that just really stood out to me was, again, animal hospital, clinic, or shelter, because that's a vet's office. And if I live in this overlay, and I have a pet, then I'm not gonna have access to potentially a vet's office for my pet, and I'm gonna have to take an Uber elsewhere to get to my vet's office? And it just seemed like an odd restriction for, again, what I see as the goal of what you're trying to do, which is get people out of single occupancy vehicles and have them take transit. And if I have a dog and I can't walk to my vet, what am I supposed to do? So I just thought that was really weird and out of sync with like slaughtering processing, which made a world of sense, right? Or like truck rentals.
Yeah, well, for some of these uses where it might seem like animal hospital, clinic, or shelter, we're not saying that existing uses that are there in place are displaced. This is for anything that's new that comes in after the overlay. So if there is an existing animal hospital, clinic, or shelter that's there now, they would continue their use as they would normally be doing. There are a lot of other locations that are not on the corridor, where it might be just off of it, that could still be potentially accessible, that are outside of the overlay. That would be something that we'd have to do some GIS on. Every single one of these might have some of those exceptions to them. So because they're prohibited within the overlay doesn't necessarily mean that you're far from one of these uses from, potentially going in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just seemed very odd. And if you're building like a new mixed use something, why you wouldn't have that. But as long as it's not precluding all amenities to residents of different types, then I think that's fine. But it's just, again, it's sort of a concern. And I think that was it on my questions. And I really thank everybody's indulgence for letting me ask all that detail in this workshop.
Vice Chair?
Yes, Chair, through you, just a couple of quick questions because we don't have much time. I appreciate the study of the park, and I thought that was quite fascinating myself. And because passing by a lot of these parking lots, we see them half empty or more than half empty. And we've seen a lot of these parking variances for apartments and multifamily, which I've granted a lot of variances in my time. I don't have my glasses, so I couldn't look up the exact word in the report right now. But was I reading something earlier where the parking minimums are eliminated?
So Commissioner, with respect to the TOD overlay, that would be the case, but for everything else, it would just be reductions. The minimums would still be in place
For the rest
for
of this,
Title 19 for the rest of the city.
for the rest of the city,
Yep.
but I'm talking about for transit-oriented development.
That is correct.
So I would just caution us to take a look at that. And I'd kind of like to understand what your reasoning is for that, because we've seen other mid-rise and high-rise projects in the past come before the city in several downtown where there's access to parking garages in the area. I remember one that was probably 40, 50 stories, and they had 0 parking spaces in their phase one. Well, if we put 500 units in a particular building, more than likely somebody's going to have a vehicle, and several people are going to have a vehicle. And my biggest concern is the burden that it puts on the neighborhood. It doesn't necessarily put on a burden if you're building, 10, 15 units and you're off of Carson Avenue and there's plenty of parking on both sides of the street. But when you start looking at some of these big developments where there's hundreds of units, and let's say let's talk about Shadow Lane in Charleston. Let's say 1,500 units go in there. I can almost see all of Park Circle being full of cars because we eliminated all the parking standards. So do you have any comments on how we might look at that and what the reasoning for eliminating that parking standard altogether would be?
Yeah, so Commissioner, one of the sections to look at, D on page 6 here, that's specific to the TOD overlay itself. That breaks down for both residential and commercial. It's a modified standard based on what we have in Title 1912 right now, which again would be also modified under the parking ordinance. But essentially, we're saying that for residential, you have a slightly different rate than you have currently. You're basically providing per unit in terms of how many bedrooms that you have. And then in terms of commercial, it's a maximum instead of a minimum. So 2/3 of what Title 1912 requires under your least intense uses, and then half in terms of the most intense uses. That's essentially what we're going for there. It's not saying that there's no parking required at all.
Okay.
There is parking that's required. It's just at a maximum rate instead of a minimum rate.
Okay. And one last question. Can you kind of explain the TOD and TOC and the, I was looking at the slide and it was saying that the TOC has a greater intensity than TOD, and it's talking about TOD is typically at the or near intersections, and the TOC was the mixed use stretching along corridors. In my mind, that was telling me that was in between the intersections, and I don't know, maybe if you can touch base on that.
Yep, that's correct. And this is the original language from the 2050 plan. This has been in place since 2021, and the densities are more or less the same. We're not changing those.
But could you explain
yeah,
just the reasoning why in between the intersections it would be a higher density than on the actual corners?
Yeah, so at the intersections, that's where you're going to find the station locations themselves. So that lends itself to more intensity. You think about Decatur and Charleston. If there's a planned transit stop right there, you're going to have more people coming on and off than you would at maybe say Arville or at right in front of like West Wind right there. That the corridor case means you have less intensity there. That was kind of the schemes, like have a number of nodes linked together along a corridor.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner DeSalvio?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, Commissioner Taylor and Commissioner Slotman, 100% exactly my concerns from both of you. So I'm not going to reiterate that, but I do have a couple concerns on the size of these mid-rises, and we talk about the parking. Are they going to be required if we do fulfill these maximums on 85% of a lot and we run into a parking issue? Are anybody that puts forward a 5-story, 7-story tower or whatever for residential, will it require some time of parking structure and then that built on top or something to equate for the residents?
So Commissioner, that would be one of those cases where it all comes down to the site development review itself. I mean, that could be something that the developer does.
And to piggyback off that, we also talked about that section. If I'm mistaken, let me please educate me. But we talked about obtainable housing. So when we start talking about parking structures and then residentials above it, is that still within the grasp of it being called obtainable?
Yeah, Commissioner, so the word attainable only means the income levels.
And I know, but you have to have a
the
price point
incentives.
for somebody to be able to obtain, like a high school student or whatever. So when you start adding parking structures at a cost of probably a minimum of a couple to 3 million,
Yeah.
you know, and especially if it's mid-terrain, right? Add another million. Is it now obtainable?
That is a good question. And I don't know if we have an answer on that specifically. I mean, one of the important things that we did in terms of the proposed ordinance here that you'll see is instead of requiring it to be 100% attainable, you can intermix a number of units into the development itself. So, for example, the minimum percentage of total dwelling units that are attainable in, let's say, the case of something that's downtown, that's workforce housing, that's 120 to 150% area median income. We'd say if there was 100 units in there, only 25 of those would have to meet that threshold.
Okay.
Yeah.
My next question, because I know we're running out of time. In the beginning, I seen a tremendous amount of slides with light rail, and I currently work on the Boulder Highway and the Maryland projects, and most of which you have in your slides. Is there a future for light rail that I'm unaware of, especially with the new construction going on right now?
So, Commissioner, one of the things that we have talked about with the RTC is Charleston specifically. And that we're doing an alternatives analysis right now, and light rail is one of the modes that is under contemplation. It is, as you would suspect, a humongous capital investment. I mean, in the billions of dollars. There has been several ballot initiatives that have been enabled in previous legislative sessions, none of which have actually made it to a ballot, but one, it is a possibility that could be put forward in a future election cycle that would help raise the revenue for transit. Bus rapid transit is what's being constructed now, of course, and it is also part of the alternatives analysis. And you look at the rest of this map, there's a number of other lines. I mean, essentially their consultant looked at the entire range of possibilities. It could be light rail, it could be bus rapid transit, and we've seen in cases all across the country, you can have TOD at stations for both. Light rail just tends to lend itself more towards good high quality transit.
On your graph right here for the Maryland, and then you look at the color chart, does that consider that red, is that considered proposed light rail or what? I mean,
that's essentially built BRT.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Taylor?
I'm sorry, and just a quick clarifying question. Despite what Commissioner DeSalvio just discussed with you about light rail and when it is or isn't going in, is this overlay and the development standards and the work that would be done under this overlay, is that any way dependent on the ability to install light rail, or would this be opportunities to develop in these corridors now?
Commissioner, it could be both.
It could be
either way,
both.
yeah.
So what we've talked about tonight is not something that's 10 years, 12 years out because of light rail. It could happen tomorrow.
Correct. I mean, even
Okay.
traditional bus transit right now
Yeah.
could support it in some cases, yeah.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Commissioner LeBeau?
Thank you. I just have a quick question, kind of following up on Commissioner Taylor's comments regarding setbacks from streets. So I guess one of my concerns is that there's a couple of areas specifically in my ward where we have 100-foot right-of-ways on existing streets, and they don't particularly feel walkable, in my opinion. And so when you think about, a 7-story building being, sited right on the frontage of a roadway like that, are there going to be considerations for either modifying those roads to feel more pedestrian friendly, where somebody's not walking 5 feet from, traffic going 60 miles an hour, in many cases? Or what is the plan for the existing roadways in some of these corridors?
Yeah. So Commissioner, I mean, it's all going to be dependent on the capital design itself. This is Maryland Parkway, this is Midtown, right in front of UNLV. along parts of Maryland Parkway, the street's actually changing in terms of its configuration within that right-of-way itself. So the sidewalks are becoming a little bit larger. There's more space for bikes to coexist in there. And then you have the development that's right out in front. Ultimately, you're going to have a right-of-way that's going to look a little bit different. And that's what's happening on Maryland right now. That's what's happening on Bonneville. Boulder Highway, same thing. You could probably assume the same would be true for Charleston all the way out towards Summerlin.
Commissioner Rogan?
Thanks. I guess just to, unless everyone wants to speak up before I do, just to wrap this up, I do want to thank everybody for all of their work that they put into this, especially Marco. Marco had to endure many phone calls with me and meetings and reviewing my literal red lines through his initial draft, and as well as Fred sitting down with me and going through that, and other members of the staff to endure my comments and criticisms of the initial proposal. And I want to thank you for doing that. You didn't have to. I'm just one of 7 on a planning commission, but you did, and I do appreciate that. I do want to comment that the director brought up, why we're here. And one of the reasons that we're here is because, again, I asked that we have this meeting. And I asked that we have this meeting because the initial proposal I had concerns about, which I think a lot of you knew. And in talking to members of my community, they wanted an opportunity to come and have actual input on this, not simply at a regular planning commission meeting, listen to us discuss it and either move it along or reject it. And this is that opportunity, and I know that staff did a good job in getting the message out that this was their opportunity to be here. But it is 5 o'clock, so it's difficult for people to be here, but it was their opportunity to come, and we did provide that for them. In addition, I do want to point out that there was a lot that staff did to move their original proposal in a direction that I think preserves our concept of a great juxtaposition of existing neighborhoods to this transit-oriented development. One of the major concerns I had was it seemed like we were going towards like a Texas-style development where we'd have these ginormous buildings next to single-family homes with waivers of residential adjacency, and you changed it. You changed it to 5 stories and 7 stories, in line with the master plan and in line with the Charleston area plan that made those recommendations, whereas before it was exceeding that. And for residential adjacency, even though it's waivable, we still have to follow the waiver standards in the code. And now there's a neighborhood meeting. So the neighbors are going to be involved and provide their input, not only at a meeting like this, but beforehand at their own meeting in their own neighborhood where they can weigh in on this type of development when it is adjacent directly to their homes. And so I think that is important. And to Commissioner Taylor's point about perimeter landscaping, the exceptions that we usually provide for perimeter landscaping, we're going to be very strict about that in the code, about not waiving those, not providing exceptions when they're adjacent to residential neighborhoods. And it's all to meet the standard that we put in the master plan, which is to be sensitive to those transitions between development like this and the existing residential neighborhood, which is required by statute, by the way. So we're also following state law when we do that. There's a couple of things picking up on what Commissioner LeBeau said about what are these streets going to look like. And I think Marco's 100% correct. We don't know yet until we know what that transit is going to be, but I asked and they put in there that we have specific thoroughfare standards that would be developed in the future when that transit is approved or looks likely, so that we can tailor the specific street, the specific corridor to that development standard. One of the other placeholders that is put in there, and we'll see what happens, is design guidelines. I think it's important that we not only look at where a building is sited and how many trees they have, but also what it looks like to build a character of a place. I think a lot of us notice that even when we're following code to a T, and there's no exceptions, no variances, no waivers that are granted, the building quality still doesn't match what we expect. And I think we've gotten used to downtown where we see a lot of the great development that we see there, and we want to have that everywhere. And I think that we're getting to a place that our code needs to move towards design guidelines. But again, in other jurisdictions that have done TOD, they've done it on a corridor level and it's been specific to that street. We're doing something different where we have an overlay district that will be applicable generally to the entire city. But we're putting in a place where later on, people who are sitting in our seats can can determine design guidelines to build that character that I think our city and our citizens deserve. So I think in conclusion, there was a lot to be concerned about at the very beginning, but I'm very happy with the way this turned out. I'm very happy with the direction that this has gone. And although we still have concerns, this is still a learning process, and this is, again, even though this could be developed if the RTC starts running buses every 5 minutes down Charleston Boulevard, that's probably unlikely, so we're still looking at this in years in the future. So there's an opportunity to change things that may not work. But I'm comforted by the fact that a lot of what this has done and the concerns that were raised tonight has already been addressed in other cities, in other states. And they've gotten through the same concerns and addressed those same concerns about parking and about perimeter landscaping that you've expressed tonight. And it's working. So I think given what we've seen in other jurisdictions, given the efforts that staff has made to protect those existing neighborhoods with the changes to this plan, I think this is something that later on tonight we should move forward as is. And over time, if there's changes, I'm sure staff will be back here telling us, hey, this isn't working. Let's be more flexible and let's change it. So again, thank you for everything that you've done. And I appreciate everybody coming out here an hour early to go through this process.
No, once again, we've covered a lot of ground, and in the interest of time, I just want to say thank you once again for the presentation. So this has not been noticed for possible action, so with that, I will just move on to citizens' participation. So citizens' participation, public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters within the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission. No subject may be acted upon by the Planning Commission unless that subject is on the agenda and is scheduled for action. If you wish to be heard, come to the podium and give your name for the record. The amount of discussion on any single subject, as well as the amount of time any single speaker is allowed, may be limited, and this is specifically for the workshop that we just had. And seeing none, then I will end the meeting.